I've been working with Polymer since basically the beginning, since it came out. I initially started working with web components in 2012 when this spec kind of finally emerged. And I worked with a lot of people from the Google team to build the first web components polyfill for web components, which unfortunately is not any part of any development anymore, because Polymer's polyfill was just way better. So a little agenda of what we're going to be doing today. We're going to have a kind of high-level overview of what web components are and what they aren't. We're going to talk about some of the components you can use to build apps for the new web, you might say. And we're going to talk about how you might join this revolution and start building components yourself. So right off the bat, let's talk about web components. What are they? So what are the problems we're trying to solve? The web was built for websites. It doesn't have this concept of applications like we expect it to nowadays. So how do we solve this problem? Well, that's what web components try to solve that. They stand in and they say, well, what if you could create your own custom elements and allow you to kind of add custom functionality to the web platform? So we have all these expectations of what apps should look like. And we have this idea of tabs. Tabs are a pretty simple concept, but they're really hard to create on the web. There's so many different ways to do this. For example, we have how you might do this in Bootstrap. This is a lot of HTML with a little bit of JavaScript to kind of actually build the tab. We have another example in Kendo, which tries to kind of even it out and write a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit of HTML. We have UI, which tries to do it all as much as it possibly can in JavaScript. And we have Angular, which tries to do the exact same thing and even it out and give you a template and build tabs that way. Well, there's a major problem with all of these. None of them are compatible with each other. You can't have Angular tabs with a UI or Kendo tabs on the same page. This is a big problem. I mean, what if you want to like the functionality of Kendo and you don't like the functionality of Angular? Well, what if we could write something like this? We can create a tag called paper tabs and have paper tabs inside of them. It's semantic and it makes sense. You can read it. And it's way less code and way less JavaScript and way less CSS. We didn't do anything here. We just put tags into HTML. So web components are are the solution to this problem. They give us custom elements. This is the ability to define new HTML and DOM elements. This is really, really cool for anyone who doesn't know anything about this. The ability to create custom elements is just an incredible idea. An example of what this might solve is Gmail. I don't know if any of you guys, if you're nerds like me, you've inspected an element on Gmail. Gmail is div soup. It's insane. There's so many divs. They all have custom stylings, and they don't make any sense. So why can't we just write, again, paper tabs? They're declarative. Custom elements are declarative. They're meaningful. I can read this code and know exactly what's going on. There's also a common way to extend these elements. There's this model that you follow that most people already know because they already know HTML and DOM. So the next piece of web components is templates. So what this is, we've all been kind of trained with this idea of templates, and we've all been using similar things like this with Mustache and different softwares that solve this problem. But nothing's ever been native. So now we have this. We have this ability to create native templating in the browser. And what happened was SpecWriter said, why don't we have this? And what benefits does it bring? We can use the DOM and not have to use cross-site scripting to bring in information. We can have this content in our template be inert, and it's never there until you actually need it. So the next section, and I think is the most important section of web components, is Shadow DOM. This is the coolest part of web components. This allows us to encapsulate and isolate our entire DOM and CSS stylings from every other element on the page. So we can write a custom element that's beautiful and fits our theme, but none of the CSS will leak out into other parts of the website. So the funny thing is you've actually been using this for a long time. The video tag is a perfect example of this. It has a controls attribute, and what that control attribute gives you is this magic set of UI elements that you did nothing to get them. Well, browser vendors have kind of been holding out on us, and that's actually Shadow DOM. We can see that by just inspecting element, and in our dev tools turning on, show shadow root. And we can see that there's this structure of inputs and other UI elements to display that on the screen. So the last part of the web component standard is another very, very important and fundamental piece. It's HTML imports. And this gives us the ability to actually load HTML documents into our application. And it kind of fundamentally changes the way we work with libraries. This is an example of how you might load Bootstrap into your site. Some of you probably have done this before. I don't know, raise your hands if you've loaded Bootstrap into your site. It's a lot of stuff. You have to install the CSS and the jQuery and all the plugins that Bootstrap gives you. Well, with HTML imports, you can do this very simply with just one link tag with the rel import. And that allows us to just load all those resources in automatically. So what you might be asking yourself is, now that we have HTML imports, we're going to be making a lot of requests to the server and kind of pounding it a bit if you get too crazy with your resources, with splitting your resources out. Well, the Polymer team has kind of created a sort of answer to this. It's called Vulcanize. And it's a tool that you install with npm. And it allows us to kind of concatenate and minify all the HTML resources, and takes and reads all those linked imports and turns them into one single page, which turns it into a really nice, solid, smooth single request application. And this works with like Grunt. There's a plugin for Grunt for Vulcanize, and there's also one for Gulp. So if you guys are familiar with either of those, you have the access to them. So as a recap for web components, we have custom elements, which give you the power to create new HTML elements and extend existing ones. We have templates, which give us the power to have native templating in the browser. We have Shadow DOM, which gives us the ability to have scoped CSS and encapsulated markup. And we have HTML imports, which allow us to load custom elements and resources. So how do we get these resources? Now that we're developers in the Polymer world and we've created this awesome element, and we want everyone to see it, how do they get our elements? Well, a couple of people built customelements.io, and it's a great resource for finding new custom elements. And as well as you can install these elements with Bower and find them with Bower if you need to. There's a couple different ways. So, and then we can use them simply by, again, using the import link tag to just bring in that HTML. And in order to use them, it's just as simple. We just start using those tags. They're just like any other HTML tag. They're treated the exact same. Another very good point, or very good thing to point out, is that they're composable. You can use multiple tags to build some cohesive environment. So, like for example, this is a core toolbar. It has a core icon button, and a span flexes the size of the bar with a title in it, and some more buttons. And it creates exactly what you might think it would create. It creates a toolbar with buttons and a title. It's pretty amazing. You can read it and know exactly what's going to happen. The unfortunate part, as of the state of the web today, is that there's a couple people who are not really on board. Safari and IE are kind of holding back, and they're not integrating web components right now. But the good part is that Chrome, Firefox, and Opera are, and they have full support for web components. You don't have to polyfill any of it. It all just works. But for the remaining browsers, there's got to be an answer for this. And that's where Polymer comes in. It supports IE 10 and up, Safari 6 and up, mobile Safari, and then adds syntactic sugar to the rest of the Web Components platform. The polyfills all come from a library called webcomponents.js. If you've been working with Web Components for any while longer than last week, you might have recognized it as platform.js. They just recently changed it to kind of make it feel a little more like a polyfill and not like you're building Polymer. Polymer also, like I said before, adds syntactic sugar with the Polymer.js library. But most importantly is we took this browser support diagram from this to this. We now have full support for every browser, every evergreen browser I should mention, with Polymer. So what kind of sugaring are we talking about? Well, it does a few things. It does some really awesome stuff to custom elements. At the top of this page, I show how you might register a custom element in just regular JavaScript. This is the plain vanilla implementation of Web Components. Well, Polymer said, why can't we just go with the same declarative approach that the whole Web Component spec goes with, and we'll create a web component that creates web components. So that's exactly what they did, and they have the Polymer element web component. And it takes a couple different attributes. Name is one of them, and you just name your attribute, or you name your element, and the usage is exactly the same. You still get that paper tabs element the exact same way. So you can implement it with Polymer or without and get the same results. So I also mentioned extending elements. Well, in order to do that in vanilla JavaScript, it's pretty simple. You just add a property that says extends a button. In Polymer, they said the same thing. It needs to be more declarative. So they added an extends attribute to the Polymer element, custom element. Again, the result is exactly the same. You take a button and you say there's an attribute on all HTML DOM elements now that's called is, and you can say that it is something else, and it extends that with this prototype. So our button is now a super button. So Polymer also adds some sugar to templates. And templates are a really simple concept in the first place. Implementing them is like ridiculously simple. You just put a template tag somewhere. The content inside of it automatically becomes inert, and it never gets displayed to your page. Well, in Polymer, they said, this is great, but how do you get that template into your custom element? Well, they decided that if you have a custom element that you're creating with Polymer, the template inside of that is going to be the template that you're going to use for your element. So it's a little bit of a convention that makes things a little nicer to use. They also added some really cool sugar on top of template that allows for binding and iterating and conditional statements. So you can use if and repeat and have templates automatically get repeated or not show when the conditions met. So it also adds some things to the shadow DOM. So creating shadow DOM elements is a pretty simple task as well. You just take an element that you're wanting to create a shadow root underneath, and you use the create shadow root method. You take that shadow that you've created and you give it some HTML or a template tag that you've created or anything like that. Well, again, Polymer said, if you have a template in your custom element, let's just automatically put that in the shadow DOM for you. So it saves a little bit of time. So that's basically what web components are. It's a pretty awesome spec, and Polymer does a lot more to make it even better. So a couple elements that we have, well, like I was saying before, the web is not really a place for application developers. It's not really a good place to build web applications. The tools we have are kind of lame. H1s, who else? We need some better stuff. So what if we had things like this? We have animated pages, we have menu buttons and page scaffolds. And these do exactly what you might think they do. Another thing to think about is, what if we, taking what we know about the mobile web now, what if we started over? What if we could take and build elements for the mobile web? What if we could take and make those elements look and feel like they should on a specific device, whether it be Android or iOS? We can do that with custom elements because they're just elements. You can style them as you'd expect any other element to be styled. You can see that this building Google Maps might be as simple as having a core icon, a drawer panel, some fields, and floating action button, if you guys have been following the whole paper material design pattern like I have. Well, Polymer added a library of these elements called core elements. One of them, namely, and most importantly for any application developer, is going to be the core toolbar. And it's just a basic container that allows you to add buttons and titles and things to. So, and you import it just like we talked about before, just like importing any other element. And you use it just the same like any other HTML element. In this case, we have a div tag that adds the My App title to it. Where am I at here? Kind of lost track. So another thing is they're made to be composable, so we can add a button with the icon menu, so we get a nice, pretty hamburger menu. And you notice that none of the CSS or styling ever leaked out on those buttons. It all just got placed right where you would expect it to be. Another great element for building applications is the core header panel. And this goes along with the composability of web components and giving you the ability to create a really cohesive experience just by plugging elements together. What the core header panel does is another container, but it does some special functionality. It knows to look for core toolbars. It knows that core toolbars are a very special thing for it. It also knows what content is, just because it's not a core toolbar. And you can see in this next slide what's happening when you place a toolbar into the core header panel. The toolbar automatically gets pinned to the top, and your content very cleanly scrolls underneath it. It's a very cool experience, and you didn't write any CSS or JavaScript to accomplish this. But another thing that's very fundamental to web components is configurability. You should be able to say, I really don't want my core toolbar to stay pinned to the top. So you can set a mode on the core header panel and say that I want it to scroll with the rest of the content. This is really cool and really adds this ability to like have settings where your users may not want that or whatever. Another very important one is the core drawer panel. So this one is really fundamental to a responsive web. And it really goes with what I was saying about what if we started over. This element takes anything with a drawer attribute underneath it, any child element, and a main attribute. And it does what you might expect it to do. It takes that drawer content and it immediately pops it over to the side, and it becomes a drawer. And it takes that main and it turns it into content, just like you'd expect. But what it does when you put this onto a cell phone is very, very cool. It automatically turns itself into a sliding out sidebar. So you can see how the drawer slides in and out, just like any native app that you guys have used today. So there's another set of elements that the Polymer team has created. And this goes with the material design pattern. They really wanted to kind of create these very beautiful, stylized elements that push the envelope and expand what we expect for the web. They add animations and spatial relationships between elements. One very cool one is the paper input. You can see a very interesting piece is that the label automatically floats up to the top, and you can still write and see what the label is. It also gives you the ability to create validation and error states just by adding some attributes to the element. Another one is the paper checkbox. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It's a checkbox. It's very simple. We all have been using this for years. But what it does special is it adds these beautiful animations. Kind of makes it ready for 2014. Some really cool kind of basic elements is, one is the paper ripple. This kind of gives us a little reactive ink effect that can be nested in any div, any element. This element can be put inside and automatically turns, it listens for click events and turns it into a nice ripple animation. Another one is paper shadow. This gives us exactly what it sounds like it gives you. It gives you a dynamic shadow with visual Z depth, and it really gives your apps kind of a pop and makes elements kind of spring to life as you want them to. So I mentioned earlier that it's very simple to style these things. Well, I also mentioned that CSS is also isolated. So how do those two things coexist? Well, Polymer gives you, or web components give you pseudo elements called shadow, which this allows you to style nodes inside of your element and inside of the shadow DOM. There's another one that allows you to kind of pierce all the boundaries of shadow DOMs and style all of them, and that's called deep. This lets us style every single element inside of our app. So we can say that all these checkboxes and radio buttons and the tabs are all going to be green, or they're going to be purple. Like, for example, here's a perfect example of doing exactly that, turning it from green to purple just by changing shadow and deep, using the shadow and deep stylings. So I think what we want to talk about next is what does an app look like in Polymer, and who's using it? Well, the Polymer team put together a really awesome app, and I urge you to check it out. It's on polymerproject.org, and it's called Topeka, and it's basically a really simple quiz app. It's got a lot of really cool animations and really nice flows from page to page. So I definitely urge you to check that out. Here's some more examples of what it looks like when you click a button on it. So it's really beautiful, and there's not a whole lot of JavaScript being written here. This is mostly custom elements doing all the work. So what's most important is the Polymer project website. We didn't get to touch on all the elements that the Polymer project gives us, but I urge you to go there and check out all the elements that they provide. They're really awesome. But Google is not alone on this. Polymer is not the only one creating custom elements. Mozilla has been working on this for a little while, and they have a software product called Brick. And it is basically a set of elements that is aimed to kind of be styled for Firefox OS. So we have things like the Brick app bar, and the Brick deck, and a Brick tab bar. All custom elements. They're all written to work on all web platforms that support web components. But like I was saying before with other other software libraries, they're not really all compatible. What about web components? Well, that's where this is awesome. They're actually using a core icon for their buttons. So you can see that they're using Polymer elements to build their UIs as well, which is amazing. They're compatible, and no one is fighting over the best framework. It's all on an open standard. So another example of what we might do for that same app is we could use the X Instagram instead of a map and show images. But they all work together, and that's the really important piece. But not just browser makers are building these custom elements. There's a lot of people who have been building really cool elements to further the web platform. Eric Ringsmith has been working on his app router, which is a very, very cool web component that allows us to handle URL changes via HTML5 push state or hash changes automatically. All you do is create an app router and give it routes that it can match. Adi Osmani has been working on Pager, which is exactly what it sounds like. It takes your data and paginates it. It can also handle server-side pagination and things like that. There's the Ajax form, which is it prevents page refreshes and sends custom headers and callbacks when validation fails. What about APIs? What can we do for APIs in web components? What if we imagine them as elements themselves? I don't know if anyone else has created a Google map, but adding a marker to a Google map is not fun. It's a pain. And here's an example of all the code needed to write a map marker on a Google map. Well, at Google they decided, what if we had a Google map tag? And that did exactly what it sounds like. It creates a map. And it doesn't have any special styling. You don't have to put it in a container. You don't have to load the library. You just load in the element, good to go. And this element can also be configurable. We can center it using the lat and long attributes. Super cool. We can control how it zooms, and we can zoom in using the zoom attribute. And all of this is interfacing with the Google Maps API, but we don't have to see any of that. We can just use the element as we expect it to.
How do you put a marker?
So, the marker. This is a really cool piece. It's super simple. You just add a Google Map marker. You give it a lat and long. You give it a title. You say whether it's draggable or not. And that's all you had to do to add that marker. It's pretty amazing stuff. It automatically created all that JavaScript that you would have had to write. So really, really have to give it up for web components on that one. But Google's been working on a bunch of these. They have the Google Web Components GitHub page that has tons of different elements that they've been working on to interface with all their different APIs. I don't know if you noticed, but Google has like 250 plus APIs that you can use for anything. So they've been working on analytics and login and Google Plus login and calendar events and sheets and documents and all these different elements that you can use in your page. But these aren't the only resources we can have. There's tons. These talks are just scratching the surface on what Polymer and web components can do. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, namely the I/O bytes from Google I/O from this year came out with 4 or 5 different Polymer-specific videos on how to use Polymer for different solutions. But next thing is, how do we join this revolution? How do we build these custom elements? Well, so there's a couple different tools. One, learn about web components. There's the webcomponents.org website. There's polymer.org. And there's these new things that Rob Dodson has been building called Polycasts. They're videos on YouTube where he shows developers how to use specific elements and how they might be used in apps. But we also need to build these things. How do we do that? Well, there's a couple different ways. Yeoman has a generator for building Polymer elements. And all you do is type yo Polymer, and it automatically scaffolds out an app for or a custom element for you. And you just start writing. But if you're not into Polymer, there's also the seed element on GitHub. And this is a great starting point for creating elements the same way. Adi Osmani also has a video on YouTube about how to build a component and share it on the different resources that we have for sharing these components. He walks through every step of the way of creating your first element and sharing it on the web. There's also tools that we have for building these. The Chrome Dev Editor is a perfect example of this. It's a great little Chrome app that kind of takes care of dealing with all the package managers and building a local web server for you. And if you guys want to get ahead of the game, I definitely suggest getting this on your laptop now, because that's what we're going to use for the code labs later. So it's a very cool tool for building web components. The next most important piece is share your elements. Everyone wants what you have. Like, someone has that same problem, so definitely share your web components. And like I said before, custom elements IO is like the place to go for sharing those web components. And it's very simple to add and share your web components that way. You just create a power JSON and you add the keywords web components to it. Components.io automatically combs GitHub and looks for those keywords and automatically puts it in its registry. So that's all you have to do to register your element. Why wouldn't you do it? And very importantly, explore out there, learn more things about it. Definitely play with elements, break things. That's kind of my motto, break things. And that's basically it for me. I'm Chris McKenzie. My Twitter is right there, my Google+. So that's it for me. Any questions?
Presentation?
What's that?
Presentation available?
I can get it available, yes. I can put it up on, I could probably share it to the Google+ page.
Yeah.
Or Meetup too, so we can get that to everybody, so you can click on the links and stuff. Any other questions?
Yeah, so just to double check, if I use Polymer to create a site, but then I created a native web component in it, would those two play together?
Yes. So the idea behind Polymer is that you load the Polymer resource HTML file into your web component that you're creating. So you'll create your Polymer web component, but then you can have a completely separate web component that uses JavaScript and writes everything in JavaScript. And they can use the same interfaces and work together completely the same. So it's completely compatible.
Sure. So you mentioned web components that are able to communicate with each other.
Yes.
And there's the shadow DOM that encapsulates them.
Yes.
So where does the communication happen and how?
So they can still communicate with children, and there's certain kind of different ways that you can also access parent elements. But the main very important way to do this, and this is what Polymer kind of presents you with, is using attributes to expose data or any type of information out of the element. That's like the most important, easiest way to do it. So yeah, using attributes would probably be the best way to do it.
My question is, I played with Polymer before. It feels slow. Can you tell me more if it's about performance?
So it definitely depends on which browser you're using. Chrome and, like we said, Chrome, Firefox, and Opera all support it natively. But there is a problem in how you write your applications with web components. You can really be really hard on web servers if you make a lot of requests. And that could definitely make it slow. There's another thing, if you use lots and lots of JavaScript to bootstrap your app in like a web component, it can definitely make it slow. So the same things that apply to regular web applications that you build today, writing too much JavaScript and bootstrapping and not lazy loading things in, still apply to web components, and they can still make things slow.
What about using utility libraries? Can you use those throughout all the web components and page, for example, something like underscore?
Absolutely.
So you just declare it once, include it once, and then you can use it every time?
Absolutely, or you can include it in your app completely, and it'll be isolated JavaScript, and it will be an isolated version of that.
So you can choose?
Yeah.
Isolated or everything?
Or everything, yes.
Can you talk to their timelines at all? Like what they're looking at? Like they're on 0.5 right now.
0.52 is
Yeah, not that means much, but.
And they're running really fast.
Yeah, that's so do you know anything about their milestones or their goals?
I don't actually. I wish I did. I know they're in constant development. I'm always on the GitHub page.
Yeah.
I'm always submitting issues and things. And they're really fast at responding.
Yeah.
And they usually have pull requests that day for a problem that I've had ago. So,
I've done the same thing.
so I don't know exactly what their timelines and what they expect to be done happening. I do see a future where Polymer becomes not the polyfill that it currently is, and just becomes a layer on top of those components. That'll take the rest of the browsers working with.
And another question, these are sort of user questions. I've been using it a lot.
Okay, good.
Recently. Is the rendering system, do you know if they plan on implementing like a virtual DOM or anything?
So, I don't know about virtual DOM. I mean, the Shadow DOM does kind of play that part, but it is a separated DOM from the rest of the website or the web page. But as far as rendering goes, I think it's just all one. Like, are you talking about like possibly having a threaded
Like
rendering?
DOM did. Like
Yeah.
instead of just rendering the DOM like React does.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't know if they have anything in the pipeline for that.
So I seen one thing with Polymer. So you could use something like, hey, use this element to create a shadow,
Mhm.
which for me is kind of like, hey, should be in the CSS, should be like separate way. How do you build your code so you don't run into these kind of problems? Just like adding elements just to add a shadow.
So yeah, that is a good question, actually. I don't know if it's like best practice to use this element over just having shadow. The one thing that the paper shadow element does give you over just adding style sheets is it can actually be changed programmatically just by changing an attribute on it. So if you wanted to add like an animation where an element kind of floats up, or feels like it's floating up on the screen, you can accomplish that just by programmatically changing that attribute. And it automatically does the CSS animations for it. But I'm not entirely sure what you should do for that. In my personal experience, I've always done CSS for the element, and I always bust it out into its own CSS page for things like that. But it's kind of a preference thing. There's no right or wrong way to do it yet.
How about the element level documentation on the actual elements that you're getting, these polymer elements? How is that throughout the community? Are you getting a feel for that being like, there's a README file in there that gives you the full API?
So there's these, the seed element and the scaffold that Yeoman gives you makes it a very awesome stepping stone for getting your elements well documented. It adds, it really focuses on using Markdown. So you actually write comments in your HTML file that use Markdown, and they actually have another element called a core document page. And what this does is it actually goes and reads your element, the whole element, reads out comments from the element, and turns it into documentation, and turns it into a gorgeous documentation page. Yeah. Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Yeah, so that's it for the talk. I kind of wanted to get a feel. It's 7:30 now. We have a couple different code labs we can do. We can do, there's a small one where we can interface with like Google Maps and use it, or we can build kind of sort of full-featured application. It's about an hour-long code lab, so it really depends on what you guys want to do. Who's up for an hour-long code lab where we build an awesome app?
Awesome app.
Awesome app?
1 for awesome app. 2 for awesome app. 3 for awesome app.
3 for
4.
4 for awesome app? Okay. Who's up for a 30-minute code lab where we just work with Google Maps or something like that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It kind of looks like that one's winning, guys. All right, so like I was saying before, we kind of base all these code labs off of the Google Dev Editor. So if you don't have that now, I would definitely urge you to get that. It's on the Chrome Web Store, and it's a Chrome extension, basically. So it's pretty simple to install.
Let's give Chris a hand for his awesome presentation.